Hello and welcome to another edition of Global Impact. And I've got like a double trouble here. They're both dressed in black, and I've got some really cool guests here, Tony and Alisa. I love saying your last name, Dilorenzo. It just sounds just runs off like I'm Italian when I say that. How are y'all?
Doing great. How are you?
Good, good. A beautiful, beautiful day in Texas. How is it in San Diego?
It's gray for this time of year, but
we actually have winter.
Yeah,
it's in the 50s.
We're dealing with our winter. We're not big winter people, so it's good.
Well, I'm going to read just a little bio. It's off your website, so you guys know this. I'm sure Tony, one of you wrote it, but they are the co-authors of the Amazon bestseller, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy and 7 Days of Sex Challenge book. We believe that the healthy combination of sex, love, and commitment is more than the foundation of a strong marriage. It's the glue that will keep a marriage together. We write, podcast, and coach couples around the world. Been married 26 years and have a son and a daughter, and you live near the San Diego. I love saying San Diego. That's from a movie, as you know. San Diego, California. So, hey, great to have both of y'all.
Oh, thank you for having us here.
Yeah, it's great, JW. Thanks.
Well, and we bring some, like we had David Platt on a month ago, and we've had different people and we kind of mix it up. And, I just was like, talk about ways we could really impact the world as if we really invested in marriages, right? I mean, I know I'm super passionate about my marriage. I'm 29 years almost in March. And so got to know the date there too, right? That would help. Yeah. Lori's birthday. I was thinking of Lori's birthday at the same time. But yeah, I'm just passionate about that we don't invest time, we don't invest resources in total transparency. My wife and I actually have used the wonderful counseling services of Alisa, and it's been great. But why is our focus on marriages so important?
Well, it's really interesting. I just want to share one thing, because this is global impact, and how do we make an impact here at One Extraordinary Marriage? And our mission from pretty much the beginning, JW, has always been one marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So how do we impact one marriage? And that's been our mission and our goal. And so when we look at how do we make a global impact on marriages and what do we do, it's always about that. How do we get behind our microphones for the One Extraordinary Marriage show? What are we writing today that might be in an article or in a book that a couple or somebody, an individual in a marriage who's struggling can pick that up and go, oh my gosh, they've given me encouragement. They've given me hope that I can have the extraordinary marriage I desire.
Mm-hmm. And it's so important because, at the end of the day, when your marriage is strong,
mm-hmm.
you operate out of a place of abundance.
Yep.
Right. You have so many more, mental and emotional resources to tackle what you're doing with your children, to tackle what you're doing in the workplace, to serve and to volunteer and to do all these other things. But when the marriage isn't going well, mm-hmm. then it's very challenging to do all the other things, because there's always all of this brain power that has to be allocated to going, okay, well, shoot, are we not talking to each other? Are we is it going to be awful when I walk in the house? Or, would I rather be somewhere else? What can I do? And so that's why it's so critical, because when this works and when it's healthy and strong, it literally impacts every facet of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, if, to me, that's always say the flat tire on that circle, right? That if everything is not evenly rounded, you can talk about your health and your work life and your spiritual life and all this. But if that marriage has got a flat tire, I think it really causes problems. How did you get started doing this? I mean, what made you? I know I'll let you tell the story, but I know you didn't come from a career of, you didn't grow up saying, let's be a marriage counselor. That was not in the original card. So how did this evolve into what it is today?
We are the accidental business, where
in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
It really became one of those things. If we go back 15 years now. Our marriage was not in a good place.
Mhm.
Our children were 2 and 5 at the time. We were doing the roommate thing really well, like
Yeah.
coexisting, co-parenting, doing all of those types of things. And yet there was no connection here, that we weren't in this place of like, oh, I really enjoy spending time with you. And I'd like to, spend more time with you. Instead, it was like, okay, did you get the milk? And can you take the garbage out? Like that was the connection we had.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until we really started to look at our options and go, do we get divorced right now? Right? Do we just pull the plug on this thing and be like, you know what? We tried it. It didn't work. Cool. Do we wait until that 2-year-old is 18 and step into this place of, yeah, we can coexist for 16 more years? And what's really interesting about that, even as I tell that story, is that 2-year-old is now 17.
Mhm.
And so being in this place of going, theoretically, if we had taken that path, we'd only have 1 more year together. We'd be like
Wow.
counting down. She graduated, and we're a year and a half away from that graduation.
Yeah.
Or our third option was to get really radical and say, hey, we haven't done marriage well to this point. Can we actually focus our energies? And can we shift everything that we've done? Can we turn it on its head? And can we do something different to create something extraordinary? Obviously, we're still here.
That would have been an unbelievably miserable 15 years.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you just imagine? I mean, wow. That
the
would have been the
reality-
worst.
The reality is that couples do it all the time.
Agreed. Yeah.
They're sitting in this place of going, you know what, I'm just gonna check out, but we have kids, so we'll stay together for the sake of the kids. And then we'll get divorced when the baby goes off to college.
Mhm.
And we'll just, do round 2.
But think about that. You could. Why would somebody have the mindset that they're going to make a commitment for 15 or 16 years? You know what? I'm committed to you until our child is 18 years old, and then I'm gone. Why not just commit to your marriage? It looks like that would be an easier commitment, right? I mean, you're willing to commit to 15 years of what I would say would be hell to versus 15 years of focusing on your marriage.
Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, for a lot of couples, they don't know where to go for help, right? They don't know how to shift. And so it's easier to stay in a place of dysfunction, of being miserable, because at least, it's kind of comfortable. Like we just know how that works. We know we don't talk to each other. We know we pay the bills, like we're functional. I would go so far as to say dysfunctional, but it's working. Instead of saying, oh, I'm going to have to do, it's hard for people to say, I'm going to have to do something different. It's hard to say, I'm going to push myself. Like I think of, some of the adventures that you've gone on, and you've had to push yourself to some pretty extreme things that a lot of people wouldn't do. Why? Because it's hard.
Yeah.
You've been uncomfortable. But having that mindset of saying, you know what, I can do hard things. I do it in my workplace. I've done it with, physical feats. Why am I not choosing to do it here?
That's a choice, right? I mean, you're so right. I mean, you're willing to, and I think that's why, and I know y'all do some of this as well, and Lori does it, my wife, and I do it, but sometimes pushing yourself past the point of being comfortable can definitely help you in other areas of your life, because you can realize, it's not that big of a deal. I can work through this. I can get myself through that. But, I also believe, and I know we've talked about this in the past during our counseling sessions, but years and years ago, and be upfront, it's not like we didn't come with all these, not that we're perfect, but we didn't have all these plethora of problems. Our pastor said years ago, why isn't everybody tuning up their marriage? You spend money tuning up your car, you spend money tuning up your air conditioner, you put new tires on you do all these things, you work on your personal areas that you want to advance in your career, you take these courses, you take night courses, you go to school. But why don't we do the same with our marriages, right? Why aren't we investing in productive counseling sessions? As I think the first time we met, you said, I said, how many people come to you with no problems? And you were like, almost none, because it's almost at the point of blowing up, right? And they're trying to fix it. And why don't we tune up our marriages early? And I think that's a big question too.
Yeah. Society has given us this picture that marriage is easy.
Yeah.
Or should be.
Yeah.
And it's all about the wedding. A lot of it is focused in our society about the wedding, right? Like, let's get to that wedding. Think about all the engagement time, like the pictures now and the videos. And then it's all about the bachelorette party and the bachelor party and the space we're going to have the wedding in, and the DJ and the photographer there, and then we get married. And many of us, and even Alisa and I think we were there 26 years ago when we said our I do's. We thought that was the end. Like, we made it.
We're married. Yeah.
It's the beginning. And so our shift is helping couples to understand, like, when you said I do, that was just that beginning. And that's where, we always talk about sex, love, and commitment. And that third one is commitment. Now, what is the commitment you're going to put forth as you strengthen your pillars of intimacy through this journey of marriage? And so I think that's the big thing. And our message is always about, like, what are you doing? What are you doing now? How are you being intentional now? Just like you said, how are you maintaining this now? What are you doing? How are you taking action? Because if not, and if we just leave that car out on the side of the road, it's going to deteriorate, right? The wheels and the tires are going to start falling apart if we don't do anything with it. Same thing is going to happen in our marriage. And so we're all about, like, how are you going to be intentional in your marriage this week? And how are you taking action?
Well, it's funny you say that, because there's also a negative connotation to getting marriage counseling, right? Sometimes I'll say that to our friends. I'm like, yeah, we try to do regular marriage counseling. We have for the last 10 years. And they'll go, oh, whoa, everything okay? Everything okay at your house? You're like, whoa. And I think that's one. And I was just thinking, I actually, for some reason, I've gotten performing some of my kids' friends' weddings, and we did one in Phoenix a couple of weeks ago, which has been great. I've enjoyed it. I've been humbled to be asked to do this. But I was just having a conversation on one, and they were talking about how much they spent on the wedding. It was the venue, it was beautiful and whatnot. And I thought, and I didn't think then, I'm thinking right now, why didn't you take 80% of what you just said, and spend it on the wedding? And then why don't you put 20% back and say, this is for your counseling sessions for the first 5 years? Let me help you get better. Let me get you some books on marriages. Let me get you the 6 pillars of intimacy. And you read that. We invest, like you say, all that money into an event, which is over, right? And why don't we do something that's a little bit longer lasting? I'm just a big fan of you guys and the podcast and the marriage and the counseling and whatnot. I think it's just an investment, way more important than a lot of things we invest our time and money in.
Well, I think a lot of it too is creating that shift. And it's what we talk about a lot on the podcast. How are you investing in this relationship?
Yeah.
Right. What does an investment mean? Instead of just saying, like, for me, I got married, I was 22 years old. And I'm like, well, this should be easy. Like, we're, somewhere down the line, it's going to be 50 years and we're still going to be in love. And, on our honeymoon, we had issues. So, like, I knew pretty early on that maybe this wasn't going to be as easy as possible. But the language hasn't been there.
Right.
That investment, investing in a relationship is actually a worthwhile thing. And it's something that we actively, propose often, because if we can think about it as an investment, well, people like making investments. They like knowing that something's going to grow. Like, they put in the effort and the time. They like knowing it's going to grow. So don't wait till like you said, till the wheels fall off. Invest early, so you don't even get that little knocking sound in your engine. You're just like, oh, okay. Like, we know how to handle this. We've got tools. We've got resources. We've gotten the help that we need. Especially in the early years when you're still trying to figure out how everything works together.
I think it's those early years, and then you have those years with kids, and there's a lot that's going on. And I do think it's vitally important to have books, resources, a coach in your corner. And even what we're seeing now, though, is this transition into the empty nesters, and how vitally important that period is as well. Because gray divorce, those who are getting divorced after their kids are leaving the house, is the biggest segment of the population that is growing in divorce, because they're like, I don't know you anymore. You don't know me. So why are we in this more? Yeah. And that's another period where we're really, like, focusing in and going, hey, you, just because you're 50 years old and the kids are out of the house, you can still have that extraordinary marriage. Like, you have many years ahead of you. So let us come alongside you and resource you.
Well, what got you to do the book? I mean, you've got some interesting points in here. And it's got some great chapters. You talk about the 6 pillars. You talk about setting yourself up for success. I read at the very beginning in the introduction, one of the key aspects of a successful marriage is the ability to pursue understanding even when two of you aren't using the same words. So I mean, there's a lot of, I've already highlighted a lot of little cool little snippets in here, but what got you to write a book, and how can people use that in their marriage as well?
So this book literally has been probably the last 13, 14 years in the making. We started talking about intimacy at the very beginning of One Extraordinary Marriage. And what we quickly discovered in the language that Tony and I were using, and the language that we would hear from our audience, is that, people would use these two words, intimacy and sex, interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And yet, and I mentioned it in the book, like, you can't be having sex 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't care how wonderful that might sound to you. It's physically impossible.
Oh, wait, that's not possible?
It's not possible.
No,
First in that bubble.
Person.
First in that bubble. And so what does it look like to have a marriage that's intimate?
Yep.
From a holistic standpoint. And so we really, as we were shifting our own marriage all those years ago, and stepping into this place of saying, okay, well, how do we now help other marriages? We had to understand and develop the understanding of, well, what makes an extraordinary marriage? And it is these 6 pillars and this framework of looking at, what's the emotional intimacy? How do we communicate with one another? Mm-hmm. What does physical intimacy mean in the non-sexual touch, so that we can actually separate that from sexual intimacy and not have this, tug of war of, I want to be touched. Mm-hmm. Is that going to sex? What does it mean to be financially intimate? Right? Which people, hear that phrase and they're like, what are you talking about? But whether you co-join your accounts or you don't, money is a factor in every marriage. Mm-hmm. Right? What does it mean to have spiritual intimacy and share faith and talk about matters of faith? What does it mean to do things together? Right? Dating isn't just reserved for, getting up to the I do. It's, we hear about dating after, but, we've been married 26 years. What Tony likes to do now is not what we were doing when I met him as a 21-year-old. Right. And then what does sexual intimacy look like in a marriage? And so what we came to understand is that most couples didn't have a framework to do marriage well. And so the 6 pillars of intimacy was really born out of that. How do we equip couples with a framework to actually help them look at their marriage in every key aspect?
Yeah, that's interesting because, you talk, a lot of people don't realize that, but, financial issues are typically the number one cause of marriage, right? I mean, you don't realize it, but there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and those can cause the first issue, and then it's just cascading, I'm sure, to the other 5 pillars that get disrupted. But, marriage is hard. I say that all the time. We're coming on our 29th year, and it's not easy, right? It doesn't get necessarily easier. I know with Lori and I, we're opposites. We're at different ends of the spectrum. We don't like to do the same things. We don't have the same personalities. So I remember reading Gary Chapman's book, the 5 Love Languages, and you go through that little exercise, and at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, no wonder we had some issues. You like these 2 things, and I like these, and they're nowhere even remotely close. So marriage is real hard. There is no, there's no manual for a successful. You don't really go to. I mean, people don't even do marriage counseling hardly anymore. It's kind of become a thing of the past. So finding good resources, obviously, number one, I think is base it on some biblical standards. And I think when you surround it on some biblical standards, you'll find an enormous amount of success there. But always working on it. I mentioned the 5 Gary Chapman's book, but my gosh, I did that years ago. I've been to the XO Marriages events. I've kept up with a lot of different podcasts and different pieces, and now I'm passionate about what you guys are doing, and it really can make a tremendous difference when we focus on that. But I think people need to go into a marriage first understanding that it's really hard.
Yeah, and it's coming again. I mean, Hollywood and just media in general has really, if you go all the way back to like the Disney movies and things like that, there's this whole idea of happily ever after, and things, arguments, disagreements, discussions, whatever you want to call them, are supposed to wrap up somewhere between 27 minutes if we're looking at a sitcom, and 2-ish hours if it's a regular movie.
Right.
And the reality is that you can do that when you have a huge cast and crew scripting every word and making sure the lights are right, and that the bathtub has all the rose petals in it. The reality is that in marriage, it's just the 2 of us.
Yeah.
And we come with our own stuff, and we go through our own individual and shared experiences. And that's going to be the filter that we look at life through. And so it's so important for couples when they have that understanding to go, but what is our framework? What is our foundation that we can come back to when things, we call them cracks in the pillars in the book. When we feel like we've got cracks, when there's disconnect, how do we label that? How do we create this shared vocabulary that allows us not to be like, you know what? Goodbye. Thank you. That was fun. Appreciate the last 5 years. I'm going to go find somebody else to do this with. And instead say, hold on a second. We're struggling in this area. Let's figure out what we can do. Let's figure out how we got here, and let's figure out what we can do, because I loved you enough to say I do. You were the most important person in my life. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with you. So let me work on getting back to that place. And why don't you work on getting back to that place, and let's take action to make our marriage extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too with 6 pillars of intimacy, and Alisa mentioned this with intimacy, most of us in society have connected that with sex. And so one of the big things too is the definition of intimacy is closeness and connection. And so if we look at our marriage instead of like, oh my gosh, it's this big burden, instead, let's look at it from a place of how are we going to get close to one another and connect with one another in the framework of the 6 pillars of intimacy. And each one of those, sometimes we may be all in because there's a massive crack and we need to address it. Other times we're just looking at them, we're like, yeah, everything's just sort of flowing along really good. But how are we just being close, staying close and connected throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year?
Now, you guys, obviously you wrote this book, so you've got a perfect marriage, right? Y'all don't ever have any issues anymore?
Absolutely.
Is that right? Just making sure, because I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it's all rainbows and unicorns, has been for 26 years. No.
I think we had a little bit of a disagreement yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things, JW, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think, one of the privileges that we've had through our podcast is that we literally, it'll be 13 years in January, have shared our marriage journey, our disagreements, our highs and our lows with our audience. And because it's just been us, and we've chosen that platform, I mean, we don't hide anything from our audience. And we tell people all the time, we're not perfect. We may have figured things out. We may be a couple steps ahead. We may recover faster. But at the end of the day, we're both human.
Yeah.
We both have our own stuff. We both have bad days. We try not to have the bad days on the same day. That's helpful. But the reality is, what can you learn and how can you be equipped? What are the tools in your toolbox so that when that happens, you have a way to get back to each other instead of, creating what I often say with my coaching clients, the Grand Canyon in your marriage. Like, let's keep it as a crack in the sidewalk. Let's not get to the Grand Canyon.
Leave it a crack. Yeah, leave it. Well, and I can't remember if I think you've said it before. I've read it before. It's like, we need to understand after a marriage, we may not like our spouse at given periods of time, and that's just okay. We don't have to like them, but we always love them. And we didn't fall in love, we didn't get married, and then we just don't fall out of love. There may be some falling out of being in love, but you don't quit loving somebody. Again, I think it's okay not to like your spouse all the time. We probably don't like everybody at some point in our time. So I think it's important of that. Now me, I want to ask this kind of one final question, or kind of getting into a point. I want to ask you 2 more things, but how has the importance of prayer been in your marriage? And I know that wasn't always a part of it, but how has that transformed your marriage? And how do you think it can also transform other people's marriages by putting that focus on praying together? I don't mean praying apart, but coming together in prayer.
Yeah. I mean, spiritual intimacy is that bringing together your religious beliefs,
your faith
practices. And one of those is prayer. And Alisa and I have been followers of Jesus since 2001. And so we've been to a number of different churches over those years. And, from the pulpit, we'd always just hear from pastors we would get up at 5 a.m. together and we're going to pray and we're going to get on our knees. And that just never was us, or we would try it and we would fall asleep. And this year we really put ourselves to task.
Being honest.
Yeah. I mean, we put ourselves to task and going, no, we need to pray together. We need to stand side by side across from one another, believing for things in our own marriage and our own family, for the one family, for our friends, for others. And this year we made it a commitment to get together 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's on our calendar. It goes off. and we get together. And the impact it's had for me is just hearing Alisa's heart.
Mm-hmm.
Where is she right now? Because sometimes in just the day-to-day conversation, it doesn't come up. Like we're going along with our own lives, and yes, we work together and we do a lot together, and yet there are still things that are happening in her heart and in her mind that just doesn't come up. And so in that prayer time, I really get to hear those desires of Alisa, and to come alongside her and me to just go, yeah, I'm believing. Like we're gonna go after this, and we're gonna attack this, and we're gonna be here. And it may be 5 minutes, it may be 10 minutes, it may be a little longer, it may be it ebbs and flows. And so Alisa and I have really allowed it to just not be strict, not be it has to be this way, and just allowed it to evolve that fits for us. And even yesterday we had an appointment, and it was right during that time. It was actually right before we usually pray, but we had to be in the car. And so we were just like,
we'll pray in the car.
We're going to pray in the car.
Yeah.
And I just said, hey,
you don't have to close your eyes and drive, right? You can pray with your eyes open. It's okay.
That felt like it might be a little too much of a test of faith for me. And so I was like, please don't do that. But yeah, the reality is that we've seen a lot of, we still see miracles. I mean, I see miracles every day in my coaching clients, but we've seen some serious miracles in our life this year through this commitment to, it's a level of vulnerability, right? When you pray out loud with your spouse and you're sharing what's on your heart, it takes, I say it in the book, it can be more intimate than sex because you're pouring out your heart, you're having this conversation with God, and you're giving your spouse permission to eavesdrop. Right, to listen in and go, okay, what's going on? And so in doing that, it's an unbelievable tool to knit a couple together, because it is a tool that you can come back to, and you can do it anywhere. Like there have been texts where he's like, hey, I'm going into a meeting. I'm like, on it, right? And because I know what that means. It's like, hey, pray for me. Or days when I remember last year was it last year or maybe 2 years ago? It was during all the COVID craziness. And I had this weird health thing happen. And Tony's like, you need to pray. You need to pray. And I remember going, I literally can't talk right now. Like I was just having some neurological stuff. And I said, the only word that I can say is Jesus. And I need you to pray for me.
Yeah.
And he did. And literally within like half an hour, there was just this incredible breakthrough. And so we see that. And that's why our heart is, there's such an encouragement for couples to pray together.
Yeah.
To witness those own miracles happening in your life.
And every time we podcast now too, JW, it's a prayer. It depends before we start, and just really remembering that mission, right? One marriage. Lord, let us impact one marriage today. Whatever the words we are using, let them be yours. Impact a marriage today. And we just go on, and we go from there. So it's been an interesting journey for us this year.
It's funny. Today I was talking to one of our workplace wellness pastors at our company, and we were talking about verses. And one of my verses I wanted to really commit to memory was 1 Peter 5:7. It said, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares. And we live in such a time where there's lots of anxiety, work, pressure, kids, got to get this done. I got my health issues, whatever they are, we live through that. And so there's a lot of anxiety, but when you can come together and pray together is so important. I read something not too long ago. It was a Barna study that did a study of couples who went to church together, who regularly attended church together. The divorce rate was 50%. And they said, people who go to church together and people who don't go to church together, the rate was similar. And he said, but those who prayed regularly together as a couple, the divorce rate was around 15%.
Wow.
And so you think about that, and it made me just kind of go, wow, wait a minute. If I knew that I could be successful in my job if I just did this, or if I be successful in my health if I did this, I would do that, right? If there was that much of an imprint. So you kind of go, if that is a number that is out there and it's available, and you're saying 85% of marriages are going to be successful if they pray together. And again, I think you've got a good point. You do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I know in the past I've tried to say, honey, we're going to pray together every single day. And you go, man, I was like twice this week, and you felt like a failure, Yeah. But if you can do it 2-3 times a week where you come together, it definitely, the statistics are saying it. You're saying it. I know in my life, my relationship, my sex, everything with my wife is better when we center all that around some prayer time. It's just unbelievably important. So last thought here. You can go to One Extraordinary Marriage. You can go to Amazon, type in 6 pillars. You could probably type in your Alisa de Lorenzo and probably get the book.
Yes.
It's a valuable guide. If you're gonna take your wife to dinner, this is maybe more important. Just get this, read this together. You've got the podcast, you've got counseling sessions, you got lots of things on the website to look at. But to kind of sum it up, if you were looking at all the keys, and I know there's a lot of them, I know there's 6 pillars and there are a lot of things, and I've got my opinion of what makes my marriage successful. But if you could give somebody some advice and say, look, just start here, do this or do this or do this, what would be that one thing? Because it's sometimes you read a book and you're like, oh man, I got I got 27 things I need to get started on. But if you could just start on one thing to get a foothold in the door, what would it be?
Well, it's something that we say often on the podcast, and it's likely even in 6 pillars. Be intentional and take action, right? Don't wait.
Right.
Anybody listening to this podcast thinking about their marriage, they know where they need to take action.
Yeah.
I coached way too many people who I've sat across from and said, hey, what's the number one? I've been asking all this questions as we get to the end of the year. What's the number one area you need to focus on at the start of the year? And nobody pauses. They all know, whether it's sex or finances or conversation. People know. So take action in that area that's already come to mind. Do one small step in the direction that you want to go, and then do it again tomorrow.
Yeah. And be consistent, right? Be consistent.
Absolutely.
Just be consistent. Yeah.
And so what I would say, the actionable side of it, the practical side of it, pull out your calendars. You know what you need to do. So that's the be intentional. The take action side of it, pull out your calendars, look at them, whatever that may be, put it in your calendar. Put an alarm, put a notification.
Yeah.
The reason Alisa and I have been successful in strengthening our spiritual intimacy this year than any other year is that we put it on our calendar. There is a 10-minute notification before we're supposed to meet together.
Yeah.
And that literally has changed that area of our marriage. Years ago, it was our sexual intimacy. We put that on our calendar. Years ago, before that was just in strengthening our emotional intimacy. Put that on our calendar. So whatever it is, get it on your calendar and stay true to it. That's what you need to do.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we put everything else important on our calendar, right? We put this podcast was on our calendar. We got meetings in the afternoons. We got meetings in the morning. I put my gym time on the calendar. We do all these things, right? But it's like, I don't know why we're not putting our marriage on the calendar. It's like the date night. I mean, everybody says, "Oh yeah, me and my wife, we do date nights," and most of the time, if you really inquire a little more about that, they'll go, "Well, we did one. I think it was August. We did one." And you're like, "Okay, that's not a regular date night. That's like twice a year, so that's probably not good."
That's literally once in a blue moon.
Yes, that's an anniversary present, right? We went on a date, so yeah, I think that's it. Well, interesting. I think put it up. So walk out of here with 2 things I could hear. Put it on your calendar and get started. Truly, those are 2 things. Well, it's been a joy. Y'all are always fun to be around. I pay good money to have Lori and I speak to Alisa, so we actually enjoy that piece. So it works out good too. So, but it is fun. This is fun. Your website's fantastic. Your podcasts are great. So look, you invest in everything else. Invest in your marriages too. So thank y'all both for taking a few minutes.
Thanks for having us, JW.
Thank you, JW.
All right.
You're truly an honor and a blessing to have in our lives.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for joining in. We hope that we've made an impact on you and an impact on your marriage. Have a great week.